My name is Margaret Ellis, 61 years old, born and raised in a quiet town in Ohio. People around here know me as the widow who spends her mornings tending to a small backyard garden and her evenings knitting by the fire. But none of that mattered on the night I pushed open the front door of my son's house and stepped into a silence that felt all wrong. The rain had been coming down hard for hours, drumming against my windshield as I drove across town. Robert hadn't answered my calls in 2 weeks. At first, I told myself he was busy at work, that he was tired of his mother checking in. But when the days stretched on without a single word, unease turned into anger, and anger slipped into fear. By the time I reached his street, my hands were trembling against the steering wheel. I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the porch light flickering. Robert was careful with everything, especially with Ethan, my 8-year-old grandson. A burned-out bulb, an unlocked door, dishes left out on the counter. Those things didn't belong in Robert's world. Yet there they were. The kitchen smelled faintly of spoiled food. A chair was tipped over in the living room. A framed picture of Ethan, glass cracked down the middle, lay face down on the rug. My heart pounded so hard I could barely hear my own footsteps. "Robert!" My voice wavered, swallowed by the silence. No answer. No sound at all, except for the rain sliding down the windows. I moved slowly, forcing myself to breathe, forcing myself not to imagine the worst. Then I heard it. A faint rustle, like the scrape of fabric against wood. It came from the bedroom at the end of the hall. I pushed the door open. The air smelled damp and metallic, the way hospitals sometimes do. The bedspread was crumpled, sheets hanging to the floor. Something shifted underneath. My knees locked. For a second, I thought I might faint right there. Then I bent down, lifted the edge of the blanket, and the world tilted off its axis. Ethan was curled beneath the bed, his face pale, lips cracked, arms wrapped around a plastic water bottle clutched to his chest. His little body shivered, even though the room was warm. His wide eyes looked straight at me, yet he didn't make a sound, not a single word. God, Ethan." My voice broke as I dropped to the floor, reaching for him. He flinched as if I were a stranger. That cut deeper than any wound could. I whispered, "It's Grandma. You're safe now. I've got you." Slowly, painfully, I pulled him into my arms. His body felt weightless, like a bird fallen from its nest. I rocked him against me, tears streaming down my face. I didn't know where my son was. I didn't know what had happened in this house, but I knew one thing for certain. Something terrible had torn through our family. And whatever it was, it had left my grandson hiding under a bed, too frightened to speak. The emergency room lights flattened every color into hospital white. A nurse guided us through sliding doors, weighed Ethan, wrapped a cuff around his skinny arm, and scanned his forehead with a thermometer that chirped once. He stared at my sleeve, fingers pinched in the knit like he needed an anchor. They gave us a curtain bay and a quiet monitor that ticked our minutes into little green blinks. Ethan clutched the battered water bottle he had carried from under the bed. I held a fresh cup to his lips. He took a careful sip and then retreated again, like a tide deciding against the shore. You do not hurry a child who has survived by being small and still. A pediatrician arrived with a calm voice and practical hands. Dehydration, exhaustion, acute stress. She told me a social worker would come and that a detective had to be notified because a child had been found alone. Her words were gentle, but they gathered in the air like frost. When the social worker appeared, she smelled faintly of peppermint tea. She sat so her knees were level with Ethan's eyes and asked if he would like crayons. He did not answer. I answered for him, ashamed of how easily the habit returned, then forced myself to stop. She asked how long it had been since I had heard from my son. 2 weeks, I said, and felt the shape of that number land and stay. Detective Harris arrived near midnight with rain at his collar. He spoke low, said he was sorry to meet us like this, and asked me to walk him through what I had seen at the house. The porch lights flicker, the chair on its side, the picture frame face down, crack splitting Ethan's smile. He asked for permission to enter before morning. He would seek a warrant if I preferred. I looked at Ethan, then at the pen in his hand, and signed. After he left, a nurse brought a warmed blanket and tucked it around Ethan's shoulders. She set a styrofoam cup of coffee beside me. I sipped and let the heat burn my tongue. Down the hall, a baby cried, then quieted. Life kept happening around us with a stubbornness that felt unfair. Ethan stirred. His eyes flitted from the monitor to the ceiling and then to me. I named what he could see: blanket, light, grandma, as if words could pin the world to the table. He did not speak. The social worker slipped in again and set a coloring book on the tray with a handful of crayons. When she left, Ethan chose gray, then brown, and finally red. He drew a box with 2 circles beneath and a little square at the corner. A truck, I thought, because sometimes a child says what he cannot say by drawing it. The red snapped under pressure. He stared at the broken tip, not crying, not breathing for a beat. I reached out slowly. May I keep this? He nodded. I folded the paper and slid it into my purse, as though it were evidence of something both terrible and true. Near dawn, my phone buzzed. Harris said his team was at the house. Careful words bridged a careful distance. We will document. We will preserve. We will call soon. I thanked him and hung up. The blinds leaked a thin ribbon of morning into the room. I brushed Ethan's hair from his forehead and counted our breaths together. When you become the adult in the room, you learn the smallest jobs can be the only jobs that matter. Breathe with him. Believe, for 2 lungfuls, that the worst has already happened and the next thing can be handled 1 step at a time. The monitor blinked, the coffee cooled, tires hissed across wet pavement. Ethan's hand found the edge of my sweater, hooking there like an anchor dropped in shallow water. I made him a promise I did not say aloud. We would not leave the truth in the dark, no matter how long it had learned to live there. Outside, the rain thinned to mist, a tired sky turning the windows pale and quiet. Morning broke across the hospital blinds in streaks of pale gold, the kind of light that would normally mean a new day. But for me, it only sharpened the edges of the night before. Ethan was curled in the narrow bed, his lashes dark against his skin. I let him sleep while I watched the color drain slowly from the coffee in my cup. Every sound in the corridor carried a weight it hadn't yesterday. The squeak of a gurney, the shuffle of shoes, the ring of a phone. Each sound reminded me that Robert's silence was still louder than all of it. Detective Harris returned just after breakfast. His tie loosened, his eyes rimmed with fatigue. He sat across from me and rested his notebook on his knee. Mrs. Ellis, we've processed the house. There were clear signs of a struggle in the living room. 1 chair broken, glass shattered. We used luminol in the hallway. It lit up. He didn't say blood. He didn't have to. The pause in his voice was enough to make my stomach clench. He flipped to another page. Your neighbor, Mrs. Keegan, told us she saw a gray pickup idling near the curb the night of the storm. Close to midnight. 2 figures climbed in. One looked like a woman with long hair. She thinks the passenger wore something red. His eyes flicked up at me as he spoke, searching for recognition. A picture rose in my mind before I could stop it. Clara, my former daughter-in-law, tugging her auburn hair out of her face, shrugging into her cherry red jacket. She had worn it to birthday parties, to soccer games, even to court the day she and Robert finalized their divorce. She hadn't looked at me once that day. Now the image of her standing in my son's yard under the rain made my skin crawl. Do you believe it was her? My voice sounded thin, like it belonged to someone else. Harris didn't answer directly. He only said, "We'll be reviewing more footage. If you recall anything, arguments, debts, unusual calls, let us know right away." Shirai, he left me with his card, the county seal raised in blue ink, and the sense that my family's grief had just been entered into evidence. When I turned back to Ethan, he was awake, his eyes heavy but alert. The social worker had left crayons the night before. He reached for them now, choosing the gray, dragging slow lines across the page. Then he pressed the red too hard, snapping the tip clean off. He stared at the broken piece in his palm, his lip trembling, but no sound escaping. He slid the paper toward me, a truck, square and boxy, wheels uneven, a smudge of red near the back tire. I folded the paper carefully, as if it might disintegrate. His silence was beginning to speak louder than words. Later that afternoon, Harris called again. His team had pulled surveillance from a gas station down the road. The camera was grainy, but it showed a gray pickup pulling in just after midnight. The license plate was blurred by rain, yet the passenger leaned out for a moment, jacket flashing bright under the floodlights, red or orange, but close enough to set my heart racing. I hung up and looked at Ethan. He was curled on his side, pretending to be asleep, though I saw the way his lashes fluttered. I wondered how much he remembered, how much he had buried under that silence. I touched his shoulder gently. "Sweetheart, you don't have to tell me now, but when you're ready, I'll be here. I'll believe you." His fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket. That small movement was all the answer he could give. Outside, the sky darkened again with evening clouds. Somewhere, someone knew where my son had gone. And my grandson, frightened into silence, was the only witness left to carry the truth. The third night in the hospital was heavy with silence. Ethan barely touched the sandwich on his tray. He sat curled in the bed, eyes fixed on a corner of the room, as if he were waiting for something to crawl out of the shadows. I wanted him to speak, even one word, but his lips stayed pressed shut. Near midnight, I stirred to the scratch of crayons. Ethan sat cross-legged, scribbling with quick, hard strokes. I leaned closer and saw a boxy shape with uneven wheels. A streak of red pressed so hard the crayon broke. Inside the rectangle, a stick figure lay flat. Another figure hovered above it. I whispered, "Ethan, what does this mean?" For a long moment he said nothing. Then his voice cracked through the dark, thin and broken. "Daddy." My chest tightened. "What about Daddy, sweetheart?" His small finger pointed to the figure on the floor. Then he dragged the red crayon across it, leaving a smear. She pushed him. The air stilled around us. My voice shook. "Who?" "Ethan." "Who pushed him?" He looked at me with eyes too old for his years. The word barely escaped his mouth. "Mom." I pulled him close, though he stiffened in my arms. My mind reeled. Clara, the red jacket, the truck. Every piece I'd been dreading was falling into place. I rubbed his back, whispering promises I wasn't sure how to keep. By morning, I called Detective Harris and told him exactly what Ethan had said. His tone turned firm. "We'll follow this lead. Thank you for trusting us with it." That afternoon, the phone rang again. They had located the gray pickup behind an abandoned warehouse. In the back seat lay a stained blanket. Under the driver's seat, a red jacket. My stomach dropped when Harris showed me the photograph. It was Clara's. When I returned to Ethan's room, he was awake, staring out the window at the parking lot. His voice was soft, but steady. "Is Daddy coming back?" I swallowed the truth that threatened to break me. "We're trying to find him," I said gently. "The police are doing everything they can." He nodded once, eyes turning back to the glass. That night he dreamed, twisting in his sheets, whispering fragments. "Stop. Daddy." I held his hand, whispering his name until he settled again. Ethan had spoken, and the truth was bleeding out of the silence. Now the police had evidence, and Clara's shadow loomed over everything. I knew the next knock on the door would change our lives forever. 2 days after Ethan finally whispered the truth, Detective Harris called. His tone was clipped, each word chosen with care. The DNA results had come back. The stains on the blanket from the gray pickup and the dried spots on the red jacket both matched Robert. I held the phone tight, my knuckles whitening as the air seemed to leave the room. My son was not missing anymore. He was gone. I lowered myself into the chair beside Ethan's hospital bed. He was dozing, his small chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. His fingers curled around the threadbare bear the nurses had given him. I pressed my palm over my mouth to keep the sob from escaping. I could not let my grandson wake to see me break. Not yet. That evening, Harris returned in person. "We've issued a warrant," he said quietly, his hat in his hands. "We believe Clara has been hiding with someone on the far side of town. We'll bring her in." I wanted to thank him, but the words felt strange in my throat. Gratitude seemed too small a thing in the face of loss. The arrest came before dawn. Clara was found in a cramped apartment, the man who had driven the pickup cowering alongside her. Harris told me later she had not resisted. She only asked if Ethan was still alive. I couldn't decide if that question was cruel or human. Perhaps both. Weeks passed in a blur until the trial began. The courthouse was colder than I remembered, the wood polished to a false shine, the air heavy with whispers. I sat in the front row, Ethan beside me. He clung to my hand as though I might vanish if he let go. He was too young to understand everything, but old enough to know his world had split in two. When Clara was led in, shackled at the wrists, I almost didn't recognize her. Her hair was dull, her face pale, the red jacket gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit that stripped her of all softness. I searched for regret in her eyes, but found only something harder, a steel born of stubbornness or denial. The prosecutor built the case piece by piece. Photographs of Robert's living room, luminol glowing blue across the floorboards, the shattered frame of Ethan's picture, surveillance stills of the truck at the gas station, headlights blurred by rain. Then the items recovered from the vehicle, the blanket stained dark, the red jacket folded into a plastic evidence bag. Each detail felt like a nail hammered into a coffin I had not yet buried. When the insurance documents were displayed, I saw heads shake across the courtroom. Robert had never changed the beneficiary after the divorce. Clara stood to collect everything. The motive was not just plausible, it was glaring. The defense tried to spin a story of desperation, of debts piled too high and pressure from the man beside her. They painted her as reckless, not murderous, but the evidence was too sharp, the picture too clear. At one point, The prosecutor held up Ethan's drawing, the gray truck, the red figure leaning over the one that lay flat. It was not presented as proof, but as a window into the memory of a child forced to witness violence. I held my breath, terrified Ethan would crumble. Instead, he sat still, his hand gripping mine, his chin lifted ever so slightly. When the verdict came, the room seemed to hold its breath. Guilty of murder, guilty of fraud, Clara cried out, insisting she hadn't meant to kill Robert, that he had only fallen, that she had panicked. But her words rang hollow, drowned out by the gavel's final strike. Life in prison, 20 years for the man beside her. The sound of the gavel echoed in my chest like both an ending and a wound. I turned to Ethan, squeezing his hand. For the first time since that awful night, he squeezed back. His eyes shimmered, not with fear this time, but with something closer to release. Justice had been spoken aloud, but the cost was carved deep. And as we walked out of that courtroom together, I understood that this was not the end of our story. It was only the moment we turned toward the long road of healing. The courthouse steps felt endless beneath my feet. Reporters called Clara's name. Cameras clicked, but their noise barely touched me. My hand stayed wrapped around Ethan's, small and trembling but steady in its grip. We walked past them without answering a single question. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid someone would snatch him away. Clara was gone, the man who helped her was gone, and the law had spoken. Back home, the house was quiet, too quiet. Robert's photograph still hung in the hallway, the frame replaced, the glass unbroken. I stood before it that night, Ethan asleep upstairs, and whispered the things I hadn't been able to say in court, that I was sorry I hadn't come sooner, that he had been a good father, a kind son, that his boy was safe. The words trembled into the stillness, and though there was no answer, I felt less alone. Life after a verdict doesn't snap back into place. It bends, reshapes itself around absence. I enrolled Ethan in therapy. Twice a week. I drove him to an office painted with murals of trees and clouds. At first he refused to speak, just like in the hospital. But slowly he began to draw again, this time with colors brighter than black and red. One day he brought me a picture of a house with 2 windows and a sun overhead. At the bottom he had written, in shaky letters, Grandma. Mornings became routine. Cereal in the kitchen, bus rides to school, homework spread across the dining table in the evening. I found myself learning the rhythms of raising a child again, decades after I thought those days were behind me. It was exhausting, yes, but it was also salvation. Each small, normal moment stitched over the tear Clara had left in our lives. Sometimes at night, Ethan woke crying, calling for his father. I would gather him close and tell him stories about Robert, the time he learned to ride a bike, the way he whistled off-key while fixing the car, how he used to tuck his son in with a silly rhyme. We both cried through those stories, but they also gave Ethan pieces of his father he could hold on to, pieces no verdict could erase. The world outside kept moving. Clara filed appeals, each denied. Newspapers wrote their headlines and then moved on to other tragedies. But inside our little house, healing was slower, quieter. We planted tomatoes in the spring. We baked a cake on Robert's birthday and sang softly. Just the 2 of us. We lit a candle and let it burn until the wax pooled. Ethan whispered, "Happy birthday, Dad." And I thought my heart might break open again, but the tears that came afterward felt different. They weren't just grief. They were love, stretching across the distance. I don't know if time heals, not in the way people promise at funerals, But time teaches you to carry the weight without dropping it. And in carrying it, you discover new strength. One evening, Ethan handed me another drawing. It showed 3 figures, a tall woman, a boy, and behind them, a faint outline of a man shaded in soft blue. "That's us," he said, "and that's Daddy watching." I kissed his forehead and pinned the drawing to the refrigerator. Robert was gone, but Ethan still had me, and I still had him. Together we would walk forward, step by step, carrying both the sorrow and the love. Justice had been served, but healing would be our own quiet work, for as long as it took. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.